first World Economic Forum meeting on Europe and Central Asia. Obviously, the World Economic Forum has been to Istanbul a large number of times, both in the last century and now, but this is the first one, the first forum meeting which focuses really on Europe and Central Asia here in Istanbul. I think it is an understatement if I say that this was a unusually challenging timing for this meeting, and consequently we have an unusually challenging agenda, both on geopolitical issues and on economic issues. Though I'd like to remind ourselves that 3 months ago, or actually less than 3 months ago, 2 months ago, everyone was totally obsessed by the geopolitical issues in this region. And I'm not saying that those geopolitical issues have gone away, but in fact they have been overtaken by the very considerable concerns about the world economy. In this closing session we have two eminent panelists. Both do not require introduction. Jean Lemierre, until very recently president of the EBRD and a very distinguished French civil servant banker, and Ali Babacan, Minister of Foreign Affairs of this country. We do hope that we will have a truly highly interactive session with you. Let me start off by giving you very quick a few personal impressions. My reading of these 2.5 days is that this was a, both on the record and off the record, there was no panic. There was no panic about the global economy, and there was no panic about geopolitical matters. In fact, I perceived it as a cool review of facts and opportunities. If I were to characterize the sessions, at least those which I've participated in, I think that there are perhaps 5 characteristics which I felt are important enough to mention here. One is, I think that everyone is very aware of connectivity. Connectivity of ideas, connectivity of information, connectivity of markets, connectivity of mindsets. I think that was an important thing running through all these sessions. Secondly, I think that everyone emphasized the speed of changes and the speed of adaptation to changes. Thirdly, I sense, I already mentioned that briefly, real optimism about underlying trends in the real economy in this region. Fourth, I noted a desire for integration. In fact, somehow perceived it as a desire for bottom-up multilateralism, something I called in one of the sessions neo-multilateralism. This implies more regionalism, building to multilateralism. And finally, my fifth characterization would be that Turkey is seen as having a central role in this region, bridging, stabilizing, exchanging ideas, modernizing, and this applies both to resources, natural resources, it applies to geopolitical issues, and applies to the economy. So if I were to characterize these 2.5 days, I would say for the short term, it's very cautious optimism. Maybe that's a bit of wishful thinking, Jean-Pierre, I don't know. And for the long term, I perceived an optimistic mindset. Now, the topics on the agenda in these 2.5 days were manifold. I'm not trying to repeat what's in the program book. It was wide-ranging, it was geopolitics, it was resource politics, it was global economics, it was a search for new governance models, etc. So we are not going to revisit all of that. I will ask each of the two panelists 2 questions, and both of them are, I believe, difficult to answer in a convincing way, because I'm not going to allow you to get away easily. The first question is, what is really your main concern, what is your main worry coming away from these 2.5 days, which you have both almost fully attended? Minister Babacan.
Well, I think inevitably the current financial turmoil, which is probably unprecedented in the times of the modern economy, has its consequences and influence on many economy-related discussions here also in Istanbul. The problem is that nobody is yet still sure how large really the problem is. And nobody is sure that if it is really over, is it all what we are going to see, or can more happen? So, of course, for the European countries and for the Central Asian countries, the current economic turmoil, the current financial crisis, has varying degrees of influence. In terms of oil and gas, there are haves and have-nots. For those who have oil and gas, those who have acquired the habit of spending the extra revenues versus who were more cautious. For those countries who have large banking sectors vis-à-vis their GDP versus those who have more moderate size. Countries who have budget deficit or current accounts deficit versus those who have less or none. Countries with high public debt versus those who have low public debt. But whichever country we are talking about, because of the connectivity, because of the multilateralism and so forth, we are all influenced at varying degrees. And how to pass these difficult times, how to survive and continue with the least damage possible is probably in the minds of people nowadays, and I got that sense during the last 2.5 days also. But relatively, I found the discussions more positive and in a better mood than probably we would expect. And that's good, because psychology is very important. Keeping the confidence, keeping the trust for the future is very important, especially when we are talking about banking sector. Because in the banking sector, confidence is the key word. Once it is there, it's okay. But then when the confidence factor goes away, even the strongest financial institutions could be questioned. So keeping the good mood, I would say, being on the optimistic side and preserving the confidence of the institutions that they have for each other, for the confidence between the financial sector and the real sector, preserving that environment of confidence is going to be very, very important. And of course, in these times, transparency is very important. For the governments, for the private sector, being very open, being easy to reach, doing the right kind of communication. Because when you don't talk about issues, when you try to hide things, when you are difficult to reach and so forth, then it just maybe creates unnecessary doubts and so forth. So I think transparency, good communication, and keeping the good faith for a better future. That's probably the mood that we should have, and also not take any unnecessary risks. Don't bet on anything. Don't play gambles, basically. More conservatism, more risk-averse approach is definitely needed for the financial sector, for the banking sector, for governments, until we see the full scale of the problem. It is like driving a car when there is heavy fog. Then you have to slow down, make sure that you have your seat belts, and drive carefully. But then don't keep big fears of having a big accident and so forth. Just be careful and go ahead. That's probably my very short summary observation.
If I may just ask a follow-up question before I turn to Jean Lemierre. It's very interesting. Your main worry, and I'm paraphrasing my words, your main worry is Are these troubles in the world economy the tip of an iceberg? Or have we seen most of the iceberg, right? Is that an unfair summary?
Well, for icebergs, we know the density, and we can make calculations that if we see the tip of the iceberg, we more or less calculate that there are 10 times underneath. But for this crisis, we don't know the substance, the material, whether it is ice or something else. So we don't know. I think that's probably the biggest, one of the biggest problems. The unknown, the big unknown of how big it is.
Yeah, maybe it's also not a good metaphor, the iceberg, because if I think of meltdown, it becomes too complicated. So let me not pursue that one. But what I really want to get to is this. As I said in my brief introductory remarks, 2 months ago, we were all obsessed by geopolitical issues, especially in this region. That is not your main worry now, right?
Well, if 2 months ago you asked me, I would be probably more worried. But then I think the international community handled this pretty well. I think the European Union has done a great job. I think the Council of Europe, OSCE, done a good job. I think we had our contribution, Turkey had contributions to bring up positive agendas, talking with people, trying to cool down the sides and so forth. So I think probably this recent crisis and how it was handled and how it was cooled down is a good example of doing good communication work. And of course, the conflicts are still there. The fact that we don't see any war anymore. Okay, there is a ceasefire now. There's kind of a peace process, not an agreement yet, but a process. But conflicts are still there. They were frozen conflicts. They became all of a sudden very hot. Now probably they will be put back into the refrigerator for a while. That's what we expect. I hope not frozen. Just put in the refrigerator and start continue dealing with it to create solutions, like we are doing for the Nagorno-Karabakh issue, for example.
Yeah. We may be able to talk about that a little later again. Jean Lemierre, what is your worst nightmare?
Well, I think the nightmare, from my viewpoint, probably because I come from the banking community, is dislocation. When you go to London or you go to New York, you have a strong feeling of dislocation, of collapse of values, banks, systems, mistakes, lack of understanding of the danger of a too highly indebted system. So I think the nightmare is dislocation. But the message from these discussions here in Istanbul is, yes, there is dislocation, but it mustn't lead to fragmentation. And I think that's the key message I take out of these discussions. Dislocation comes from an excess use of a model, and fragmentation would be terrible. And in the region, Turkey, Central Asia, all the countries, Russia, would have a big problem if suddenly OECD countries decided to withdraw and to be less open. And the crisis doesn't come from that region. It's an outside shock. And the fragmentation would come the moment from the trade viewpoint, financial viewpoint, cultural viewpoint, many countries decide to withdraw and to deal with themselves, forgetting that there is a lot of value at being open. It's not only a word. Unfortunately, you may see behaviors like this. For one reason, main reason from my viewpoint, the first time in a huge crisis, taxpayers have come on board. You have a new partner today, taxpayers of hundreds of millions of taxpayers in Europe, the United States. They were not so much part of the debate. Now they are a key part of the debate because they have saved the system. And of course, political leaders may have the attempt to think that to be accountable to taxpayers in many countries, they have to be local. And the big challenge is to continue to explain that being local is not the best way to move forward, that despite some mistakes, fragmentation would bring us back to 20 years ago, and that's not progress. We must fight against fragmentation. Now, I must say that I'm got a lot of comfort from all the discussions here over these days about the fact that nobody has spoken about fragmentation. Nobody think that fragmentation is the way to move forward. And this is probably, for this community here, the main challenge is to make sure that dislocation doesn't lead to fragmentation, but to a sound, sustainable openness. So my fear is fragmentation, and my hope from the meeting is that will not happen.
Could you, this is risky, but could you elaborate on what fragmentation may imply in concrete terms?
I shall repeat what I've already said to some here, so I'm very sorry to repeat myself. But a few weeks ago, the Minister for Finance of Singapore has given to me a very clear example of what it could be. He said, you see, the moment what he has called rich countries, I think Singapore is a rich country, but he has put himself in a different side. Rich countries have given a guarantee to banking deposits. Does it mean that the money of the emerging market countries will flow to these countries to be protected? If yes, we have to react. Can we react by giving a guarantee to depositors in our countries? Yes, we can, but some countries are not very rich and may not be very credible. So what is the answer? Control of flow of capitals. And that's fragmentation.
That's right.
If countries begin to have the impression that the money flows where it shouldn't go against them, then they will react. And we know what it is. We have seen this 20 years ago. That's an example of fragmentation. And you could find a lot of tiny examples in which the world can be easily fragmented. I'll take another example on my own experience. In 1998, when we had to build a line of defense to protect Asia and Korea, we have put a lot of billions of dollars to build a line of defense, exactly the way it is done today, and to make sure that there is a rollover approach in the funding of the economies. Then it was necessary to explain to the parliaments what we have done. And the question came is, why do you protect a country which may destroy jobs in Europe by competing? And that's a risk of fragmentation.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what we may see, and I think we have to be very clear that we have to fight against this. There's a lot of value to be created. We have created by openness, by trade, by flow of capital, by a sound allocation of resources. That's the reason why all the discussion, WTO, and so on, are so important today, and probably even more important than yesterday. But it will require probably some effort to explain what we do, why it is done, and where is the value. Probably part of the effort will be to show that the financial system is more sound. And maybe you go to a different question, which is, what about the reform of the financial system? What about the governance of the financial system? What about the supervision and regulation? What about the incentive in the financial system? Just to reassure public opinions that it will not happen again.
Thank you. One thing that keeps on bothering me, not necessarily during this World Economic Forum meeting, but over the past few weeks, we all put a lot of trust, as we are sitting here, in the willingness of the taxpayers, as you said, to show solidarity and pay up to continue a system, the financial system, right? To keep the architecture in decent shape and maybe restructure as you have done in 2000, 2001 in this country. How is the taxpayer in these countries going to understand this? Where is the explanation? Where is the education? Or should they simply trust politicians on their word here?
Well, if you ask me the question, may I slightly correct you? I'm not so sure that taxpayers make the clear view that they should protect the financial system as it is.
No.
I think what they do, which is more clever, is to make sure that the shock on the real economy is not too big. And the strong incentive for taxpayers to come on board and to protect the system is to make sure that the economy continues to be funded and that jobs are not destroyed. And this is the real motivation. And at least in my country, they understand this very well. They understand very well that if the banking sector is destroyed or cannot work because of lack of confidence, because whatever it is, the real economy will not be financed and jobs will be destroyed. And I think the real motivation of the taxpayers shouldn't be to protect banks, but to protect the real economy. That's what they do, and I must say that the challenge is huge there.
Yeah.
But I make a lesson out of your remark, is that taxpayers will probably not accept any longer business as usual on the banking sector. They will ask for measures. And I go back to my initial remark. I think there is a new partner in the debate. The taxpayers and political leaders will have to be accountable. And the responsibility of the banking sector is to understand what is happening and probably to change a few things in a credible way. I must say that the debate is probably quite open there. But I do not believe on a personal basis that it will be business as usual. We cannot continue of high leveraging. It's not only a question of efficiency, it's also a question of ethic. We cannot ask taxpayers' money to continue to do this and restart again. We have to be, and I think this is a political question, we have to be much aware of the fact that for years the system has been presented as the most efficient. People can ask questions today. Is it really the most efficient? And so we have to restart, rebuild the system to make sure that it is well controlled, that supervision is well done, more coordination at the global level and among countries, and probably a more realistic approach of the economy.
Thank you. Now, this was the, as I said, when I asked you the question, the difficult part of trying to summarize your impression of this event. So what was your main worry? And you've both expressed your main worry, which is largely overlapping. Now for the happier part. On what topic, Minister, did you come away smiling?
Well, first of all, as you said, although we had some risks in terms of the timing, I would say, having this meeting here in Istanbul in such a difficult time and having so many people actually attending and discussing many issues and seeing the mood here, overall mood, I would say, was quite satisfactory. But also the fact that in the time of serious crisis now, the countries are able to talk to each other very fast, very frequently. We are seeing one summit after another in China and now coming up in Washington and in Europe and so forth. So the fact that we have all these multilateral settings, whether private settings or official settings, that the countries are being able to come together fast, take decisions, move forward, and realizing more and more that we are so interdependent. And we can act together in a meaningful way when there is real necessity. I think this crisis also, again, made us realize that we are living in a global village. We are actually so close and so affected from each other. So I think this global sense of unity and dependency, interdependency, is probably something good for the long term. That the mood that we are in, the fact that we are influenced all, whether it is global warming, or terrorism, or now this most recent financial crisis, is creating a more sense of we have to be together and we have to act together.
Thank you. Jean Lemierre, what made you smile?
Two things, one negative and one positive. The negative one is negative. Of course, it's good, but it's the extraordinary, quick, massive, and positive reaction of the states and the central banks. You know, you have said this, I'm a civil servant by training. And for years, everybody has said, you know, states are useless, they are slow, they don't understand. Well, please, central banks have been extraordinarily efficient and pragmatic and reactive. Governments have taken responsibilities immediately. They have mobilized resources. I say this for the US and for Europe. I say this for the countries in the region. You know, let's speak about Russia. Russia has reacted quickly and very well in a very efficient way. So the quality of the system is there, and it is reactive, takes responsibility. My second reason to be positive, it's because I know the region, it's the emerging middle class. We have an emerging middle class in the region. It didn't exist in Central Asia 15 years ago. You begin to see the middle class. The young people, they are not yet entrepreneurs, they are more managers, they are very well trained, they have all the specificities of the middle class. Today they have a low income, they are not oligarchs, they have a low income, but they want to engage, they want better education, they want openness, and this is the main asset of the region, this emerging middle class, and I hope we shall continue, whatever happens, to engage with them, to support them, and that they will not pay the price of the crisis. And in many countries, this is the concern of the political leaders, to make sure that this emerging middle class can grow. And this is probably the best hope of the region. If I may add one comment on a personal basis, they are very bright.
Thank you, Jean. Now, let's go for questions from the audience. Please raise your hand if you want to speak, and please identify yourself. I see one gentleman here on the first row. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Anil Kumar from United Kingdom. Jean Lemierre, I tend to differ with you when you say the central banks and the government have acted very quickly. In fact, it's too little too late. What we see is they have saved the institutional stars of the economy. So UK can save its bank, USA can save its bank. What has happened to the fabric of the commerce in our economy? They've been totally destroyed. It's too little, too late. Because down the line, the company which supplies to them, the vendors, the service companies, they've all been destroyed. We lost the confidence, lost the trust, lost accountability. How do you repair that? So the whole fabric of commerce is destroyed. Is there a way one can repair that? Thank you.
May I react
Yeah.
very quickly? Too little, too late, and for many private sector banks, too big, too long. It's partnership.
Yes.
You cannot blame central banks and governments if you are not honest, if I may say so, and look at what other people have done. Okay, they are an easy scapegoat. So let's be clear about the fact that some people have done too big, too long, and maybe some people have been too slow and too little. Then we shall agree.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Maybe just a few words to add. I think all these recent events should, at one point, turn into a study during which we have to look at why this happens and what can we do to make sure that this does not happen again. Where was the mistake? Who is the guilty body, person, organization, or what? Because obviously, there was something missing. There was something wrong. And we talk about taxpayers' money. All these measures are, in my view, important so that those taxpayers can continue to make money and to continue to pay taxes. Otherwise, it will be a lose-lose situation for all. But on the other hand, if there is no penalty for anybody and saying that, okay, this is like a natural disaster, so we will try to recover. It is not that. This is not a natural disaster. There was causes of this problem. And at one point, some kind of an evaluation of those who have the blame should be learned, should be taken appropriate measures. And then we have to do serious structural reforms to make sure that this does not repeat. It is very costly. It has economic costs, it has social costs, and probably the social costs will come later on. Lower growth worldwide means more unemployment, more miseries, a lot of families being in more and more difficult conditions. So we cannot treat this as an earthquake or a tsunami where it just happens and we have to cover the costs.
Thank you. Could I ask you, Jean Lemierre, I mean, assume for a moment that we understand what the current world economic situation is about, and assume for a moment that it will develop like you have both diagnosed, described. That will take a while for us to get over this huge bump in the road, if it's not more. But let's assume that all happens. Can we look beyond that? And could I ask you the question, is there another hidden problem which we don't see yet? Because, to be frank, half a year ago, what we are going through today was not predicted. Yes, there were one or two economists who had very dark scenarios, and I think they should be, their names should always be mentioned in sessions like this with great respect. Nouri Rubini, Martin Wolf, etc. have been saying these things, maybe one or two others, over almost like a year, including the risk to democratic capitalism, as they called it. But we obviously were unable to read the signs or to react to them and act preemptively. So is there another problem of a different nature which may be beyond this one, or as they say in France, when you come to a railway crossing which is not protected, it has this beautiful sentence on the signs in the village where I used to have a house, un train peut accrocher une autre. You know, a train may be hidden behind another one. Jean.
And it does happen.
Yes.
No, I think that there is a highly visible question which has not been dealt with over the years, and this is the one which is probably behind part of the difficulties we have. I'll try to say this in the following words. Can we have a global world, a global economy, a balanced globalization with a major imbalances in the system? And you understand what I mean. You know, when you have such a transfer of savings from an emerging market country like China to the largest economy in the world, the United States, you have a major imbalance in the system. And globalization is, at the end of the day, should be about fairness and balance. And here you have a massive imbalance embedded into the system. I think nobody has the answer to the question. It's a major question, highly sensitive, because I can understand why China does accept it, because it's a way for them to grow faster, which is perfectly respectable. The question is it sustainable? And I'm sure that this is going to be one of the most important questions for the new American president in a few weeks.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, we have been actually discussing about global imbalances for such a long time.
Yeah.
I have been attending, during the previous cabinet, when I was the economy minister, attending G20 meetings, World Bank, IMFC, and everybody said global imbalances, risks, and so forth. But on the other hand, we didn't see really any serious measure to prevent those imbalances even grow further. Because it was a good environment, because the banks were lending a lot, so banks were happy, they were making money on the paper. Consumers were happy because they were getting more and more loans, getting new houses, apartments, cars, and so forth. And the politicians were happy because economic growth was there. Why step in and come up with unpopular, restrictive measures which are going to make probably banks unhappy, consumers unhappy, and maybe slow down growth and so forth. The growth was more than expected everywhere in the world. In Asia, in the United States, in Europe, we have been going through growth rates, world economic growth rates, much higher than expected, while realizing all these imbalances to grow more and more, and then not taking the courageous steps. And as a politician, I know how it is difficult to step in and say that, hey, stop guys, we have to be more careful, otherwise this is going somewhere wrong. This is not very popular. The governments don't like doing such kind of things usually. And I think probably lack of proper supervision, lack of auditing, proper auditing, lack of taking this right structural measures at the right time was causing all this. As Turkey, for example, we went through this FSAP study, Financial System Assessment Program, done jointly with the World Bank and IMF. It's a voluntary work. We asked for it. Because we looked at the other countries, we saw Germany, Japan, many other developed and developing countries going through this process, and we did it. And the reports were excellent, public sector, financial sector, and so forth. But there was one country which never asked for one, and that was the largest economy of the world. And so we probably need more global also supervision and auditing mechanisms, because if something goes wrong with a major economy in the world, we all feel the consequences, and we don't want to pay for it. We want to make sure that everybody make sure that their house is clean. There's nothing dirty on the carpets and so forth. Because we should have more of a feeling of responsibility of what could happen. And if we are going to be so reliant on each other, if the economy of the countries are so dependent to each other, then we should have the right to say that to even the bigger economies, saying that you have to be careful, you have to do the right things. Because if something goes wrong in your country, we are affected, and we don't want to pay for it.
Thank you. I'm looking for the audience, gentleman over there in the back and in the middle. Yes, sir.
Mehmet Tekan from Turkey and leading a global company based in Turkey. In this summary session, we talked about interconnectivity, how the system is connected together, and then you mentioned the risk of fragmentation. And then what gives you hope is the joint action, or the reaction that was taken. I'd like to get your opinion. What's your level of confidence of the continuation of this global action, and what advice or what direction can you give on how that needs to reshape itself after having seen such a systematic risk on a global scale? Thank you.
Adapting the architecture. Jean Lemierre?
Well, it's a very important question and a good question, and the answer could be very long, but I'll make a first remark. I think that today we are in times of crisis. And in times of crisis, the question is to protect, to build lines of defense in a collaborative way, and not to organize a beauty contest. I say this because I'm always very worried when some try to say who's good, who's bad. That's a question for tomorrow. The question for today is to be together, to build lines of defense, to mobilize resources, and to protect real economy and people. Maybe some have made mistakes, and I speak about emerging market economies. Some may have made mistakes, but nobody deserves to be wiped out of the map by a crisis. And that should be very, very well understood. And some may understand what I mean. I don't want to go further, but I have a very clear view about the fact that many countries have done, emerging market economies have done very well over the last years and deserve to be protected from an outside shock. Now, there's a lot of work to be done on the architecture for tomorrow. And that will be the debate in the United States of the G20. I've taken part in the creation of the G20 in 1998. That was one of the answers to the Asian crisis. And Turkey has become, with many other countries, a key member of the G20. And it shows how much the membership, the ownership of the system must change. And we see, probably you'll think I'm too positive and optimistic, but this crisis and this type of institutions do offer a very unique opportunity, really, to change the ownership of the system and to put people together. When you think that many countries have reserves today in the world, China has reserves, the Middle East, they have reserves, and we should be able to make a clever use of all of these reserves to protect and to prepare the future. But that would be done only if countries have a fair view about the fact that they were well treated and they have a say in the system. So I will not go any further, would be too long, but the bottom line of what must be done now is about fairness, a fair say in the system for people who are involved and have a stake. Probably it hasn't been the case yet. I do believe that the G20 meeting in a few days now should be an example of this new attitude.
Minister Babacan, brief response maybe on this new architecture, or?
Well, my Prime Minister will be attending the G20, which is going to be taking place about 10 days from now on. And actually, it was Turkey's suggestion 3-4 years ago to have summits of G20. It never took place.
No.
It was considered to be more of a financial, technical, economic issue. It was economy ministers and central bank governors coming together once a year. And we asked over and over again, we should have a summit, because the G20 means approximately 90 to 95% of the world GDP and 90 to 95% of the world foreign trade.
Yeah.
So G20 means the majority of the world economy. There are developed countries, G8 is there, but then there are also emerging countries like Brazil, Turkey, and others are also there. The increasing interdependence also definitely will require more of a global architecture for better supervision, for better regulation also. So if it is the case that if something goes wrong in one country, that it is the cost of that country, the treasury of that country pays for it and it's closed, but it's not the case. So we need more transparency. Unfortunately, some of the big economies of the world are not yet transparent enough. We don't know much about, I don't want to name any country, but we need more transparency. We need more external supervision, external check and control and reporting. If we just let one country do its own job and then does its own reporting, maybe it's not safe anymore. So I think all these are going to be probably things to be discussed. But fragmentation or isolation, being more inward-looking is not the way out. So maybe just a reflex. I'm especially using the word reflex because it is, you do it without even thinking about it. The reflex is sometimes more protection, more looking inwards, preventing from foreign companies getting in, buying banks and so forth. These are not the way out. And we should let trade to be as free as possible. We should let the flow of capital as free as possible. Protection is not the way out. It is very easy for any president, for any prime minister, and coming out, okay, these foreigners hurting us, we are going to close them, we don't want them, we are going to prevent them buying from our assets and so forth. And this is very populist, I would say. Okay, this sounds good for the ordinary citizens, but it is going to hurt them in medium to long term. Because when you limit this, then you damage the efficiency, the productivity, the all the benefits coming from openness suddenly goes away. So rather than trying to limit things, maybe continue to be liberal, even more liberate, but then put in place proper ways of supervision and regulation mechanisms.
Thank you. There is time for 2 more brief questions. Lady here on row 3 and a gentleman in the back.
Thank you. I'm Marjorie Krause with APCO Worldwide. I think that, we've been talking about this new architecture, but my experience is that sometimes, government overreacts, and I think we're going to be redefining the role between business and government. And how do we, or what ideas do you have for making sure that balance is put in place in a way that's effective and not in a way that has unintended consequences?
Okay, thank you. We'll if you can just reserve that response for a moment. And the gentleman in the back, and then we'll go to both panelists. Yes, sir.
Ömer Akay, Middle East Managing Director of CH Tramhill, an American infrastructure company. My question is, we are in Turkey, and maybe we should conclude answering a question that is curious to Turkish people. Under the circumstances, what are the major and maybe radical differentiators for Turkey to attract or continue to attract foreign direct investment under the circumstances? I'm sure people outside are wondering if this foreign direct investment that has been increasing in Turkey, is it going to go away? Is it going to continue? And what is it that administration or the Turkish businesses have to do to continue to attract these type of investments? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We will have very brief responses from both panelists to this, and then we will go to the closing remarks. Maybe first, Jean Lemierre, you have both been very much involved in foreign direct investment, to take this last point. And I think you can easily point to the essentials here. Sure.
Maybe on the first question, which of course is very important, which is taxpayers have come on board, governments need to be accountable, so they need to have clear measures to explain what's happening. At the end of the day, the danger would be that any innovation in the financial sector would have to be submitted first to a group of regulators before it's launched, and that would be the mistake we should avoid. I think the answer is in our hands, and especially in the hands of the banking sector, which is to show that there is a clear understanding of what has happened, and that the key value is not to increase the size of the bank account, but to create value for the people. And that's the recipe. If we are able to manage the banking sector in such a way that we convey to taxpayers that yes, innovation is good, but only if it creates value, and you understand what I mean, not only quarterly results and bank accounts of managers, top managers, then you will reassure the public opinions and the governments will agree. If we are not able to deliver this as a community, then we'll have a tougher and tougher regulations. So I'm not convinced that the governments are the key question. The key question is the capacity and the capability of the private sector to show that we have values and that we do believe in a sustainable banking sector creating value for people. As far as for Turkey, I think Minister Babacan knows much better Turkey than I, but I would simply say that the bank for which I work has invested in Turkey, and very happy to be in Turkey. And you know, investors vote with their money, and at least good investors vote with their money, and we are very happy to be in this country. We do believe in this country, which is a well-managed and balanced country with growth driven by domestic consumption and by export, with very bright labor force. So the answer is simple: yes, do join, do come and do invest.
Well, it couldn't be a better pitch. You can't improve on that.
Well, the investments of the private sector has been the key driver of growth for Turkey. So we had high growth rates 5 years in a row, and this major source of that high growth was through private sector investments. And after the recent financial crisis, not only in Turkey but also in many countries, the private sector will be more reluctant to invest. They will be more risk averse. Even if they want to invest, probably the financing will not be as easily available as it used to be. So it is, I think, no surprise that, like in many countries, probably during the next few years in Turkey, it is not going to be a surprise to see slightly lower levels of investments, including the foreign direct investments as well. But we don't really expect a very sharp slowdown. I mean, it could be a more moderate slowdown, and not just us, but many analysts, I would say, many investment banks, when you read their reports, the international organizations, when they read their expectations as well, nobody expects a very sharp drop, but more of a moderate slowdown for some time. But then FDI is a long-term thing. It is it's a very important signal for a long-term confidence in the future of the country. And we have been receiving increasing amounts of FDI. And it was only $1 billion $1 billion a year for 10 years before 2002, before our government. And then it was 2 billion, 3 billion. In 2005, it jumped to 10, then 20 billion. Last year, we closed with $22 billion of FDI inflow. By any measure, this is a serious amount. And how we measure FDI is actually cash inflow. That's how it is accounted for. So for some deals which have been already completed, already signed, the cash inflow is still continuing. So even if there is, let's say, no deals anymore, new deals, there is still a serious amount of cash flow which is going to continue to come in to, in a way, fulfill the commitments that have been made before. So, so we are not that much worried, I would say.
Thank you. All interesting things come to an end, raising expectations for the next time, of course. I'm very grateful to the two panelists for bearing with my complex questions and being so frank and educational to all of us. The conference will be closed by Børge, Brende, Managing Director of the World Economic Forum. Your closing remarks, please, Børge.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to thank the panel for an excellent summing up of what has been a very important summit. I would also like to express our sincere thanks to the government of Turkey, and especially Prime Minister Erdogan for co-hosting this summit. The Prime Minister underlined at the start of the summit that we are in truly transformational times. A new world order is likely to emerge from the current economic crisis, and that it is important that it is inclusive rather than exclusive, and that it favor dialogue between nations in the region. As the Prime Minister strongly underlined, our world does not need new cold or hot wars, but constructive peace in this region. That's a prerequisite for also handling the tough economic times that we are now facing. And we must acknowledge that this summit took place during a difficult time with the backdrop of the financial crisis, and the financial crisis also now affecting the real economy. But as the Foreign Minister underlined, Turkey has been doing extremely well the 7 last years. The Turkish economy has doubled in less than a decade. And it is clear that emerging economies in this region is not responsible for the global financial crisis, but these economies will not escape its consequences, but hopefully suffer less than others. The region's economic growth will slow, but then hopefully rebound quickly. The world around us today speaks about the financial and economic crisis. What we take away from this summit reflects the spirit of a Chinese proverb, which says that crisis is an opportunity riding the dangerous wind. The summit focused on the opportunities which will be stemming from this crisis on national, regional, and global level. And to continue this Chinese analogy, even the word crisis itself, when written in Chinese, is composed of two characters, one representing danger and the other opportunity. Other key messages coming from this summit. There are real opportunities for increased and enhanced cooperation in regional development across a range of economic sectors, industry, agriculture, and services, and good prospects for attracting extra regional capital to help to finance this. Economic diversification away from dependence on oil and gas is also vital. The countries in the region must also tackle problems of corruption, and there is a clear message that water scarcity is an issue that has to be addressed more in a more comprehensive and a more active manner, because this is a prerequisite also for a sustainable development. The 2 days were marked, in my opinion, by optimism and fighting spirit and confidence in the resilience and strong potential of a speedy recovery of emerging economies, and especially in this region. And we have witnessed a true collaborative spirit and both acknowledgement and call to a joint action as the only way forward to overcome these crises. I would like to thank our distinguished participants for these 2 very important days, and of course our partners that have also been helping us in having a successful outcome of the summit. It was our privilege at the forum to be holding our summit also in this most beautiful city, and I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Europe and Central Asia team in and at the World Economic Forum, headed by its director, Christoph Weber, for all the work that has been done in the preparations of this summit. And I also would like to thank the staff and Publicis Life and Abissa and everybody else that has been involved in the operational part of having this summit. Thank you very much. Safe travel back home, and we'll see each other hopefully next year at our next summit. Thank you.